The day the sky changed. September 19th, 1942. The early autumn sun was rising over northern Germany, painting the sky in pale gold. The airfield at Leeuwarden, one of the Luftwaffe's busiest bases, hummed with familiar morning sounds. Ground crews shouting orders, engines roaring to life, and the metallic clatter of tools striking steel. Amid this controlled chaos stood Oberleutnant Wilhelm Johnen, a young but already respected fighter pilot of the Luftwaffe. He tightened the straps on his flight jacket as he walked toward his aircraft, the Messerschmitt Bf 109G, its frame gleaming with a fresh layer of paint. For Johnen, this was routine, another patrol, another mission, another chance to prove himself in the vast, unforgiving skies of the war. But something in the air felt different that morning. Rumors had been circulating among the pilots. A strange British aircraft had been sighted near the coast in recent days, fast, unusually fast, and flying alone. Some dismissed the stories as exaggerations. Others joked that the British had built a magic plane powered by witchcraft. Johnen himself didn't believe such tales. He trusted machines, not myths. When the alarm bell rang, however, all jokes vanished. A voice crackled over the radio tower speakers. Unidentified aircraft approaching from the northwest. Single target, altitude low, speed unknown. This was unusual. Bombers rarely flew solo, especially during daylight, and their altitude was normally high, not skimming close to the sea. Johnen felt a sudden surge of adrenaline. He sprinted toward his aircraft as crewmen rushed to start the engine. The propeller spun to life with a violent, familiar vibration. He climbed into the cramped cockpit, slammed the canopy shut, and taxied onto the runway. Oberleutnant Johnen cleared for takeoff. With a roar, the Bf 109 shot forward and lifted into the sky. The ground shrank beneath him, replaced by the vast expanse of clouds stretching toward the North Sea. As he climbed higher, the radio buzzed again. Target identified, likely a reconnaissance aircraft. Be advised, speed readings inconsistent. Inconsistent, the word stuck in his mind. What kind of bomber had inconsistent speed? Soon the sea appeared beneath him, a cold, restless gray sheet. Johnen scanned the horizon, his eyes trained from countless intercept missions. Then he saw it, a small, sleek shape gliding above the waves. 2 engines, thin, elegant wings, not the bulky silhouette of a Wellington or a Blenheim. It was lighter, almost fragile-looking, a pale shape reflecting sunlight like polished bone. Johnen frowned. "Strange aircraft in sight," he reported, "closing in." He pushed the throttle. The Bf 109 responded instantly, its Daimler-Benz engine roaring as speed climbed past 580 kilometers per h. The frame rattled, but Johnen was used to it. He had chased Spitfires, intercepted American B-17s, fought over the English Channel. Nothing surprised him anymore. Or so he thought. The mysterious aircraft ahead suddenly dipped lower, then surged forward with impossible acceleration. Johnen blinked. It wasn't diving to escape. It was simply pulling away. He increased power. The engine screamed louder. His speed climbed. Yet the distance grew. Ahead of him, the strange British aircraft seemed to float effortlessly. No defensive guns, no armor, no escort fighters, just raw, unbelievable speed. Johnen narrowed his eyes and flew even lower, skimming close to the waves to reduce drag. He nudged his engine to near maximum output. The cockpit vibrated violently, warning dials flickered. Still, he couldn't close the gap. He radioed back to base. "Aircraft accelerating, I cannot reduce the distance." Static, then the reply. "Repeat your message, Oberleutnant." He felt frustration boiling. "I said I cannot catch it. It is pulling away." Silence. Even the ground controllers didn't quite know how to respond. Johnen watched in disbelief as the mysterious intruder climbed sharply, its engines humming smoothly. almost mockingly. No bomber behaved like this. No bomber could behave like this. He tried one last burst, throttle fully forward, engine howling in protest, but the British aircraft simply tilted its wings and disappeared into a thin cloud layer, vanishing like a ghost. Johnen leveled his plane, breathing heavily. His engine was overheating, his fuel dropping faster than expected, and the target was nowhere to be seen. He radioed reluctantly. "Target escaped. Returning to base." As he flew back, he couldn't stop replaying the encounter in his mind. How could a bomber outrun a fighter? How could something so lightly built, was it even armored, move with such impossible agility? Back at the airfield, mechanics surrounded his plane. Officers approached, asking questions he had no real answers to. What type was it? How fast was it? Did it dive? Did it have escort fighters? Johnen simply shook his head. "It was different," he said finally. "It was made of wood, I think, and it was faster than anything we have." The officers exchanged uneasy glances. The Luftwaffe prided itself on speed superiority. The idea that the British had built a bomber faster than a Bf-109 was almost unthinkable. And yet Johnen had seen it with his own eyes. The rumor was no longer a rumor. Something new had entered the war. A wooden aircraft, light, unconventional, and terrifyingly quick. And the German pilots, for the first time, felt the unsettling realization that they were not the fastest hunters in the sky anymore. The aircraft had a name. But Johnen would learn that only later. For now, he knew only one thing. The sky had changed. The morning after the strange encounter, the briefing room at Leeuwarden Air Base felt heavier than usual. Pilots whispered among themselves, exchanging uneasy glances. The night's reports had already spread. Oberleutnant Johnen had chased a lone British aircraft and failed to catch it. For a Luftwaffe pilot, such an event was almost unheard of. Johnen sat quietly at the table, arms crossed, replaying every second of the pursuit in his mind. The commander, Hauptmann Bremer, walked in with a thick folder of intelligence papers and set them down with a thud. The room instantly went silent. Bremer adjusted his glasses and looked at Johnen. "Say it again, slowly." Johnen sighed. "It was unlike any aircraft I've seen. Light, maneuverable, and fast. Too fast." Someone snorted. "A bomber? Faster than a Messerschmitt? Impossible." Johnen didn't react. His expression alone silenced the room. Bremer opened the folder and pulled out a grainy reconnaissance photo, a slim twin-engine aircraft with a smooth wooden shell and narrow wings, the same outline Johnen had seen above the sea. "This," Bremer said, "is what you encountered." A whisper moved through the room. "The British call it the de Havilland Mosquito," Bremer continued. "We thought it was experimental. We were wrong. It is operational." Johnen leaned closer. The shape was unmistakable. "That's it. That's the one." Bremer tapped the page sharply. "Made mostly of plywood, built by furniture factories of all things. No armor, no heavy guns. But—" He paused. "Very fast." "How fast?" one pilot asked. Bremer hesitated. "Faster than our frontline fighters at most altitudes." The room fell into stunned silence. For months, German engineers had mocked the idea of a wooden combat aircraft. Wood belonged in workshops, not in war. Aircraft was supposed to be steel, aluminum, and firepower. But here, it was a British plane that broke every rule of design. And yet, it worked. Johnen remembered how effortlessly it had climbed through the clouds, as if physics itself favored it. Bremer continued, "This aircraft is performing reconnaissance over our bases. It photographs everything, our airfields, railways, depots, and it escapes before any fighter can reach it." A pilot shook his head. "So what do we do? Just let it fly?" Bremer's voice was firm. "We find a way to catch it, But deep inside, even the commander sounded unsure. Later that day, Johnen returned to his Bf 109. Mechanics had opened the engine panels, inspecting signs of stress. The pursuit had pushed the aircraft dangerously close to its limits. One mechanic wiped grease from his hands. "You flew her hard yesterday." "I had no choice," Johnen replied. "The British aircraft was too fast." The mechanic frowned. "A bomber? Too fast? That shouldn't be possible." Johnen didn't argue. As he stared at his aircraft, the machine he trusted with his life, he felt something unfamiliar: doubt. For years, the Luftwaffe had dominated the skies with superior speed and engineering. But this Mosquito, this wooden phantom, threatened that confidence. To clear his mind, Johnen asked to read any available intelligence on the Mosquito. A young signals officer brought a stack of documents captured from British sources and decoded intercepts. Johnen read for hours. The Mosquito had been designed as an unarmored ultralight aircraft. Instead of relying on guns, it relied on speed. Instead of metal, it relied on wood, a resource Britain had in abundance during the war. And most surprisingly, it was not only a reconnaissance aircraft. It could also operate as a bomber. A fighter bomber, even a night fighter. One frame, many roles. Johnen closed the file, stunned by the ingenuity behind the design. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the radar alarm sounded again. Another fast, low-flying target had appeared over the coast. A Mosquito. Pilots scrambled. Engines roared. Johnen ran but was pulled aside by the radar officer. "Too late," the officer said quietly. It already passed over the port and turned back towards the sea. How long ago? 3 minutes. 3 minutes. That was all the Mosquito needed to cross enemy territory, photograph its targets, and vanish before German fighters reached altitude. Johnen felt his frustration building again. How are we supposed to stop an aircraft we can't reach? The officer had no answer. Days passed, then weeks, and each time the radar detected a lone intruder, the same pattern repeated. The Mosquito arrived, completed its mission, escaped without a trace. It was as if the British had built a ghost. Reports came in from other Luftwaffe bases as well. One squadron over France failed to intercept. Another near the Dutch coast reported identical failures. Fighter pilots across Europe were filing the same complaints. The Mosquito's reputation grew with every mission. The wooden ghost, the timeless aircraft, the bomber no one can catch. Johnen began hearing these names whispered with a strange mix of fear and admiration. One afternoon, during a rare break in operations, Johnen stood near the edge of the airfield watching a mechanic tighten bolts on his aircraft's landing gear. The wind carried the faint smell of fuel and sea salt, reminders of the countless missions flown from this place. A fellow pilot, Lieutenant Heller, approached him. "Tell me honestly," Heller said, crossing his arms. "What did it feel like, chasing that British Phantom?" Johnen thought for a moment. "It felt," he said slowly, "as if I were trying to catch smoke." Heller raised an eyebrow. "Smoke?" "Yes. Something real, yet untouchable. Something there, yet always slipping through your fingers." Heller nodded thoughtfully. "You think it'll change the war?" Johnen looked up at the sky, now painted in deep shades of orange. "The sky is never the same after something faster enters it," he replied, "and that aircraft is faster." For the first time in the war, Johnen felt as though the air above him, once a battlefield he understood, had become unpredictable. The enemy had introduced a machine that defied logic, challenged physics, and refused to conform to anything the Luftwaffe had prepared for. The Mosquito was more than an aircraft. It was a warning, a sign that innovation could outpace tradition, that agility could outrun strength, that wood could defy metal. And deep down, Johnen sensed something else. This was only the beginning. By the spring of 1943, the Mosquito was no longer a rumor, no longer an oddity. It had become an obsession not only for the Luftwaffe High Command, but for every pilot tasked with defending the skies of the Reich. At Leeuwarden Air Base, each new radar report of a high-speed intruder produced the same bitter rhythm: scramble, climb, chase, fail. Oberleutnant Wilhelm Johnen had by now attempted to intercept 4 different Mosquitoes. Each time, the story ended the same way, with the wooden aircraft dancing ahead of him, slipping away into cloud or darkness, like a spirit that refused to be touched by human hands. It wasn't incompetence. It wasn't hesitation. It was simply physics. The enemy flew faster. And this realization weighed on the Luftwaffe like a stone. In early May, a meeting was held at the base's operations center. Officers crowded around a large map scattered with pins marking recent Mosquito sightings. Lines traced the aircraft's impossible flight paths straight, confident routes that cut deep into German airspace and escaped just as easily. Bremer, the base commander, pointed at the longest route. From the North Sea all the way to Munster, and back in 20 minutes. Not a single interceptor closed within firing range. A murmur rippled through the room. 20 minutes. Johnen felt his jaw tighten. Bremer turned to him. Oberleutnant, your experience is the most extensive. Explain why we are failing. Johnen straightened. Sir, the Mosquito speed is the key. At altitude, it exceeds 600 kilometers per hour. We can only match that under ideal conditions, and even then, only in a dive. One of the intelligence officers added, British reports suggest they are improving the engines. Even faster variants may appear. Another officer muttered, Faster? Faster than this? The despair in his voice was impossible to hide. Bremer tapped the map. The Führer demands results. Night fighters, day fighters, everything we have is failing. We need a tactic, not a miracle. Johnen hesitated, then said, If we cannot outrun it, we must outthink it. The room turned silent. Later that evening, Johnen sat in the small mess hall, scribbling notes on a sheet of paper. He outlined possible interception patterns, climbing before the Mosquito arrived, predicting its route, ambushing it instead of chasing it. But each idea collapsed when tested against the aircraft's sheer speed. Heller walked in and sat across from him. Still trying to catch your ghost? Johnen sighed. If this continues, we may lose control of our own skies. Every mission they fly gives them more information, more photos, more precision. Heller shrugged. Maybe the High Command will develop something faster. Johnen shook his head. I've spoken with the engineers. Nothing in development will outpace the Mosquito before next year. And by then, who knows what else the British will build. Heller leaned back. So this wooden toy, ye, might win the intelligence war? Johnen didn't answer. 2 days later, the air raid sirens roared across the base, but this time something was different. Instead of a reconnaissance run, this Mosquito was part of a bombing raid, a small formation, fast, low altitude. Explosions thundered near a supply depot as bombs detonated with frightening precision. The Mosquitoes vanished before German anti-aircraft batteries had even locked onto them. Johnen, sprinting toward his aircraft, watched smoking debris rising into the orange sky. To be struck and unable to respond filled him with a cold, unfamiliar anger. He climbed into his Bf-109 and launched upward. Vector me toward them, he demanded into the radio. But the controller's answer was the one they all dreaded. They are already leaving our sector. Already leaving. Johnen accelerated anyway, chasing a fading hope. At 600 kilometers per hour, his aircraft rattled like an angry beast, the engine temperature rising dangerously. He scanned the horizon relentlessly. Then a flash of sunlight reflecting off something far ahead. A Mosquito. He dove slightly, gaining a fraction more speed. Slowly, Slowly, the distance narrowed. For the first time, he felt he might actually reach firing range. The Mosquito pilot must have noticed him, because the British aircraft began a shallow climb, the kind it could perform effortlessly thanks to its lightweight structure. Johnen gritted his teeth and followed. His engine protested, dials trembled, but he didn't let up. 50 meters gained, 40, 30. Then suddenly the Mosquito leveled off and pushed forward with full power. Johnen watched in disbelief as it surged ahead, widening the gap once more. His aircraft shuddered violently, unable to follow that final acceleration. He was close enough to see the British markings clearly, yet completely powerless. The distance grew and grew, and then the Mosquito disappeared behind a cloud bank. Johnen slowed, his heart pounding, sweat dripping into his eyes. He had been so close, so painfully close, but almost meant nothing in the skies. He radioed base, voice low. Mosquito escaped. The reply was quiet. We know. When he landed, he found Bremer waiting on the tarmac. You nearly had it, Bremer said. Johnen laughed bitterly. Nearly is useless. That aircraft is rewriting the rules of the air. Bremer nodded. I fear you may be right. They walked together in silence. The smell of burning fuel from the bombed depot drifted on the wind. Finally, Bremer said, the High Command is beginning to understand something we should have realized months ago. Johnen looked at him. That the Mosquito isn't just a fast aircraft, Bremer continued. It is a new kind of warfare. Intelligence, precision, speed. The British have built not a bomber, but a strategic advantage. Johnen stopped walking. He gazed up at the cold blue sky where his adversary had vanished minutes earlier. A wooden aircraft built in furniture factories. Rejected by British officials at first, mocked by German engineers. Now terrorizing the Reich with a combination of simplicity and genius. Johnen whispered almost to himself, wood defeating metal. Bremer placed a hand on his shoulder. Sometimes the future belongs not to the strongest, but to the fastest. Johnen closed his eyes, realizing the truth. The Luftwaffe had met an enemy it could not corner. An aircraft too light to slow down, too fast to intercept, and too brilliant to underestimate. And as long as the Mosquito roamed the skies unchallenged, no German pilot, no matter his skill or bravery, could claim absolute control of the air. The wooden ghost had reshaped the war, and it would continue to haunt the skies for years to come.